The seed is planted and the terror grows. Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Vincent Green,
I'm your host, Noel John Tui.
and this is Invasion of the Potty Snatchers. And this week we got a very special guest for y'all. And this special guest is Robin Block. Robin, so excited that you're here. Please tell the folks who you are and what you do.
I am Robin Block. I'm the CEO and founder of Creative VC, and we specialize in community-driven entertainment. And you may know of us from the In Search of Darkness horror documentary series, or our sci-fi series, In Search of Tomorrow, or the action movie documentary that kicked it off, In Search of the Last Action Heroes. So
awesome documentary.
Yeah, thank you. So that's what I do. Delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Fire away.
Man, I swear to God, right? I don't get too excited about many things now because I'm pretty much dead inside. But I'm so excited about this episode, man. I'm so excited because like these documentaries are everything that any horror movie fan, especially a horror movie fan of the 80s,
so comprehensive.
Like, you know what I mean? So comprehensive. Like, and one question I wanted to ask is kind of a twofer. How did you get into making documentaries, and what made you go for the long form storytelling?
Really good question. So the long form storytelling is like, how do you even approach a decade of horror? like there's
especially that decade as well.
Yeah, like that decade. So I read there was 686 horror movies released in the 80s, right?
Oh my Lord.
But I wanted to keep it simple. So I had been really into a lot of YouTube creators, and they were doing kind of short form retrospectives between 10 and like 30 minutes. And I loved the idea of being able to dip into a film, get that kind of hit, that nostalgia hit, and then move on. So in my mind, I imagined like this infinite video store where we could just travel around, see the artwork, dive into a movie, get the measure of it, come out. And that was basically the premise for In Search of Darkness. And
genius.
It's not trying to be too clever. I think that from the outset, what drove me to tackle 80s horror was an overwhelming feeling of nostalgia. Something incredibly comforting. It's like seeing old friends. I think
agree.
I
commented on that, yeah.
Yeah, so many people discover 80s horror when they're in their kind of early teens or younger, and it has an imprint. And when you get older, you kind of miss your kind of former self, and so you sort of dive back into these movies. And a lot of times, it's reconnecting with who you used to be, And so I certainly, when I was reaching my late 30s, I was getting very nostalgic about 80s horror, the aesthetic, the artwork, the movies, and that's
the feel that these films had.
Absolutely,
to be replicated.
Yeah, and within In Search of Darkness, we didn't try to be too clever. We didn't want to come at it in an intellectual way. We wanted to respect the films, even some of the films that were pure exploitation. We wanted to respect them, but it started from that emotion about a nostalgia, and then building up from that. It was really interesting when I started working on it. I knew I had a hit straight away. Like I did a little kind of 90-second video of just like a dance with a dead track with just like
that intro, though, your intro music is amazing.
It just blew up, and
so
everyone came to play, and I'd never experienced a hit like that. And now, having finished the trilogy, and the journey that not just me but the whole team have been on, our director David Weiner, I think it's fair to say we've made a dent in the horror universe. Like, the real horror heads know about this, and you can't fake a 15-hour documentary with 125 contributors.
I would rather pull all of my own teeth out than edit your documentary. Because I was thinking, like, it felt very just friendly conversations with Barbara Crampton, Jeffrey Combs, Robert Englund, whoever, like John Carpenter. The list went on, by the way, which I'm just blown away by. And then, like, it's like, okay, here's like The Fog, and here's everyone talking about The Fog. But I'm sure, you can't approach them that format. You just have to let them talk, and then some poor soul have to go right. I have to, like, I've 200 films that we talk about, and I have to get like where Robert Englund just says, "Oh, I like that movie," and then I'll jump to Barbara Crampton saying, "Oh, yeah, that was like a big." And when I'll jump to that other one. I was just watching it, going, "It's incredible what they've done here." But
David Weiner did an immensely brilliant job, and Sam Way, our editor, who's edited 4 of our films now. They're just top of their game, and I think that when I look for partners, when I look for people to work with, I look at 2 things. I look at capability and technical capability, but what's more important than that is intrinsic motivation. So I feel like the projects we work on are aspirational projects. Like if you're into genre film, is there a better project that you could ever work on than In Search of Darkness?
Oh no, it's the dream.
Yeah, so
it's the dream.
Absolutely, and that there's a whole story about how that came together. Because I didn't have a director when I was doing the Kickstarter. David only signed on, I think, halfway through. We were doing the Kickstarter, and I'd done a lot of due diligence on people in the horror scene. I had like an informal advisory group that people were coming in and out of. And I remember sitting down with David and saying, "Look, this is my vision for this project. This is what I need you to do, and I want you to come back to me with a synopsis based on this, 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 and this." And then he wrote up a synopsis, and we went back and forth. But that became the roadmap. What neither of us really knew, I certainly wasn't aware of, is how good David's scripting is and how detailed he is. Like we've done 125 interviews over that trilogy. We're probably sitting on 400 hours of material, right? So
that seems right.
You
had Chris Jericho comes in out of nowhere. Chris Jericho starts talking to me about 70s exploitation. I know.
He knows so much about horror. So much.
And I'm a big metalhead. And there's a joke in the metal world about, like, is there anything Corey Taylor just doesn't have an opinion on? And I'm just sitting there, and Corey Taylor of Slipknot comes up, and I was
like, a funny story about
Corey Taylor's there.
Go. Funny story about Corey. Right. So when I was doing the Kickstarter originally, I had a tier where if you gave us 1,500 quid, you can be in the documentary, right? And we've stopped offering that now because it can go sideways. But I had a couple of people sign up to it. One of them was Diana Prince, Darcy the Mail Girl from she actually was on board as a producer, and that's who linked us to Chris Jericho, funnily enough. But I was going through the names, and when we finished the Kickstarter, I wrote to everyone. There was one email I didn't know. So I wrote and I went, "Hi, thanks for supporting us. We're moving into production now. Could you, I've got to start arranging interviews. Could you tell me who you are and what you do?" And I got this email back about half an hour later saying, "Hi, I'm Corey Taylor. I'm the lead singer of Slipknot."
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was that, he just seen a kick. And then, of course I jumped on it. I said, "Look, we're going to be doing collector edition with Elvira. We'd love to do one with you." I've got to tell you, Corey was just an absolute dream. I didn't have to do any lawyer stuff. It was just between me and him, contract between me and him. Basically gave us keys to his entire 6 million social media, and it blew up. And and I finally got
to tell by him how much it meant to him.
Yeah, and when I finally got to meet him, because I did the interview with him in person in Las Vegas for In Search of Darkness 3. And he's the real deal, you don't have to show him clips. You can talk about pretty much any horror movie and he'll see it in his head and talk. Yeah. I mean, it's humbling actually how much he knows, and he really loves it. Same with Chris Jericho. I had a surreal moment because we were shooting for the sci-fi documentary In Search of Tomorrow in LA. And I was in the UK, and I ended up on this Zoom call with Chris Jericho and Peter Weller.
What?
Peter Weller of the Jam.
Yeah, as in like RoboCop, right?
Peter Weller.
Peter Weller and Chris Jericho. And I'm like, "Hey guys."
It's like RoboCop and Y2K, Y2J, like, you know what I mean? It's like, what?
But it's been an amazing journey, and what's brilliant is just seeing like how people love it. Like people just play it in the background. There's all these unintended things. Like by the time we got to part 3, we realized that people use it as a way to discover new movies. Right? So we recognize that what our role now is with the In Search of Darkness series is actually to curate. So not just remind you of what you know, but show you what you don't.
So it's like you're saying the digital video store, pretty much, isn't it? Though, like, you know what I mean? That's what you want to do. It's kind of like it's like blockbusters living on through streaming or something, you know? Isn't it weird the way horror like reaches so many different kind of little kind of pockets and how passionate fans become about the genre and how passionate they become about their own little niche? Like, you know, like Giallo, like some people are so passionate about Italian horror, and some people are just like they think it's like a
Look how
stylized
passionate Robert Englund was about Italian horror.
Yeah.
So surprised.
I got a story about him.
Such a god tier guy. Go ahead, please.
So the story about Robert Englund was like
Freddy Krueger to our viewers, by the way.
Of course,
we're talking
like,
about Freddy himself.
If you were watching this podcast,
yeah, exactly.
I know the second they said it. I know.
But you know, we tried so hard to get him for part one. It was crickets, and then like, and I don't in my job. I don't really have to do it too much anymore, but in my job, like you have to deal with agents, and it's always a bit of a kind of challenging conversation with agents, even good ones. But this was like the best conversation with an agent I've ever had in my life. So I got a call out of nowhere when we were doing part two from Robert Englund's agent going, yeah, he can can he be in Search of Darkness part two? And I was like, yeah. we can
just
make
do
that...
just wait 2 seconds and then go, yeah.
Yeah,
cool. Yeah.
Right. And it was the best conversation with an agent I've ever had. And basically he said, look, you know, part one was a hit. I want to be in hits. He gave us, I think we were at his house for 3 hours. I wasn't there. My director in LA was, and he was brilliant. And, you know, we still have oodles of material that we haven't used. And, you know, I'm really grateful for the journey because I have so much respect for the horror fandom because it's deep. It's really deep. They know their stuff. And it's like, you know, you can't con horror fans. You have to deliver.
That's something that really came true in your documentaries, and one thing that really struck me when I was looking at like Robert Englund and Barbara Crampton and who was in The Fog, but also in Halloween 3.
Adrian Barbeau was in The Fog.
Thank you. Yeah, and watching these like older people who, for me, like I know horror didn't start in the 80s. But like the icons, I always just think of these people, and then it was them when they were like John Carpenter, like they talking about being kids and go and see, like, you know, the 50s genre, like The Thing from Space, the woman who wouldn't die, The Brain That Wouldn't Die, and all these kind of movies. And listen to them tell nostalgic stories about their father bringing them to these movies as kids. And I was just like, shit, at one stage they were little dorks like me. I don't know why. I just put them on this tier where they were always just in the business and behind the scenes, but they were just nerds, and their lives took this really cool path. But it was just really heartwarming, and I almost like tear jerking just seeing these guys talking about what it was like in the 50s and the 60s. They wanted to make these movies when they were kids, and that just, I don't know, it was just lovely. It was just a really lovely kind of thing to see.
Robin, what do you think about the 1980s? Like, what do you think was the reason that it gave birth to so many iconic villains? Like, do you think it was a Halloween knock-on effect from the like 1978?
I think it's a confluence of things all happening at once, right? So I think that the socio-political environment in America, Reaganomics, technology, the advancement of VHS and video stores,
Cold War.
Yeah, the Cold War, absolutely. Right. So all of these things, and horror thrives when there's lots of political uncertainty, right? And fear. And America, which was driving 80s horror, was going through a very turbulent time. So you had these sort of convergence of different forces all happening at once, and you had all this bottled up creativity because it's not like now where you can just make a YouTube video start like there was no
on an iPhone, you know.
There was barrier to entry, and suddenly it was lifted, and it's like the volcano happened. And you know, so that's what I think there was a lot of repressed creativity that came out. And you know, even now, you know, you can go back and see a straight to video 80s horror movie that is deeply flawed, but see historical context in it of its time. You know, what was I watching the other day? I was watching Repo Man, Alex Cox, right? Which is a great movie, but I was just picking up on the vibe. It was like Los Angeles in the 80s, and it was just like this whole aesthetic, which might have, because it's so long ago now, you really see it.
Mm,
Basket Case. Basket Case is amazing because it's got all of
Yeah.
these back roads of New York when New York was really shady.
mm,
You know, like they mature, you know, and we as the viewer, we change. Like you can, I remember loving The Thing when I was a kid.
It's
mm.
our favorite film.
It's such a good movie.
I went to see it again in December in London, and I
40th anniversary.
yeah, the 40th, and I was like, I've forgotten what how amazing this film is, and I appreciate it in a different way. You know, with In Search of Darkness, uh, you know, sometimes as a producer you get lucky. I got lucky, right? And you know, everyone worked their asses off, but we got lucky, right? Because we had a concept that people bought into, and have kept buying into, and you know that you know In Search of Darkness will be around in 30, 50 years. You know, it'll still be relevant. And, you know, sadly, there's quite a few contributors that are no longer with us. Larry Cohen,
Mm.
Stuart Gordon, you know, like you're not going to be able to capture that breadth of talent from that era
Yeah.
again.
But you'd still have extra footage from both of them, would you?
I mean, we have loads. I mean, we're moving on to 90s next because we need
Awesome.
to change, and there's a lot of
Slashers.
yeah.
The
So
rise of slashers and a lot of stuff happened in the
it's going to be
90s. Yeah.
so much fun and a very different creative challenge. So we start working on that this year. But I would love to go back to the 80s. I'm sure I'll do a re-release in a few years with a bonus disc of 90 minutes of stuff that we didn't manage to crack into the you know into the 15 hours or whatever it is at the moment.
The
Can
archives.
I ask if you've got like feedback from people like me who feel like thanks for showing me for the absolute phony that I am. It was just like, oh yeah, 80s horror film got it covered. Like Vinny kind of said earlier, like, you know, I've seen my Thing and my Cujos and all my Chris and all these kind of movies, The Shining and stuff. And I was like, dude, that's surface. That's surface. That's like I really, really, really into music. Like, you know, do you listen to Taylor Swift? And then, you know, it's just like you're like, yeah, like surface. And then the deep dive,
I love hearing these
feedback.
stories. I love hearing those stories because it wasn't something we thought about with part one. But with part two, we knew that was part of the package. So when we delivered the merchandise for part two, it came with like a watch list in the booklet. So
Oh, genius.
But by part three, when we did the first round of crowdfunding back in October 2021, we surveyed our backers and we invested quite a lot in this software package that had like all the images of all the videos that had been suggested by our audience. And they curated what went into part three. So they told us what they wanted us to feature.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And now with all the merchandise coming out for part three, we've got another watch list. We're going to be running a flash sale for 2 weeks for part three and the rest of the trilogy on March 28th. And one of the things we're doing is we're going to put out a free PDF, which is being worked on at the moment, with like every movie that we have covered.
Oh my God.
And we're calling it the In Search of Darkness Movie Challenge. And like, you know, we don't know what award we can give you because we can't check whether you watched or not. But like, you know, you get to have your horror card if you
That's what you should do. Just a horror card, just the honesty with yourself.
Yeah.
That these essential. I haven't seen Chopping Mall, and I hate myself more than words can tell you.
I actually hate you more than words could tell for not seeing that.
As right, have you not? Have you seen? Tell me you've seen Chopping Mall.
Of course,
I have seen Chopping Mall, and we've got because Barbara Crampton's in it and Kelly Maroney's in it as well.
That's what I mean. That's the thing that bugged me even more because I've been such a fan of hers for my entire life.
Barbara
Crampton. Then she was, it's
a great movie. I mean, it's like again, that's a movie now that people really love it. You know, it's taken on its own cult status, this familiarity with it. It's a friend. These movies take on a life of their own. You know, they become friends who you revisit from time to time. You know, and whenever they're playing like The Thing or Halloween or like The Fog, any of these movies in London, and I'm around, I will go and see them because there's something really lovely about watching it with a live audience. And then they're not scary. It's a very intriguing experience, a very comforting, warm, nostalgic experience.
They're atmospheric. It's
atmospheric 100%. So, but yeah,
I watched Cannibal Holocaust with Ruggiero Deodato actually in there, and it was amazing to be with people who love this, watching it on a big screen and having it was the Dublin Horrorthon, like,
yeah,
and having him there to take questions afterwards. Even had an interpreter with him because his English isn't great, which is fine. And but yeah, no, you're right. There is something so tribal, I guess. Maybe you're with your people or something. You're really
100%. And I've learned so much through In Search of Darkness because there's been so many challenges to overcome. Like, it's been very difficult to do what we've done, but we've done it, and we'll always have that trilogy now. I'm actually excited about moving on to 90s and kind of saying that we delivered 80s. Now we get to rise to a new challenge because we want to keep the familiarity of the format and the branding of In Search of Darkness, but we want to make it relevant to 90s, so 90s feels different, the aesthetic feels different.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of meta aspect of horror that kind of became more prevalent in the 90s as well.
It made fun of itself a little bit. It really did. Yeah,
I call it the lost decade, right? So I've been like in my bookshelf behind me, I bought a whole bunch of books about 90s horror because there's lots. We all know the big stuff, and it's funny because I was talking about this the other day, like our relationship with CGI. I can look at bad CGI now from the 90s with affection.
Right? True. Same, yeah.
But I didn't realize there was so many 90s horror movies that I didn't know about. There's just this whole layer of direct to video stuff or direct to DVD stuff. Then on top of that, you've got kind of horrors that were mislabeled as like high-end thrillers. Like Seven, which is a horror movie, Silence of the Lambs, which is a horror movie. There's a whole bunch that we're going to feature.
That word thriller, I always felt it caused confusion in the horror genre.
The thing is,
horror was out. Horror had like peaked, and
call
then
it a thriller and go for an Oscar.
Like Single White Female was a thriller. That was a thriller for me. But there was but they just started saying like whodunits were now a thriller. I was like, no, it's something like a Scream is a horror movie.
Yeah, it's
a horror movie.
And
I don't. Maybe I just don't have the language to really define what that line is, especially when there's so many subgenres. But yeah, it is the lost decade when you put it in those terms. That does make sense to me.
And 90s are in at the moment, and I feel like we've established a format and a fan base, and we just want to keep delivering. I want to do noughties, I want to do 70s, if I can keep the band together, and if there's enough demand for us to keep going, we'll keep going.
Do you think that the 90s would be a trilogy?
No,
that's what I mean. Yeah.
So we're doing it.
We're actually,
we're changing the format a little bit. So we're cutting the decade in half. So
is this an exclusive? Did we just get an exclusive?
No, well, if you haven't looked at our Instagram for the last 5 months or something, but we already put it out there. So it's going to be 1990 to 1994. So similar length. It'll be like 4 hours plus, but it'll give us the opportunity to go a bit deeper, and deliver basically. The problem with In Search of Darkness 1 is we said we're going to cover this decade of horror, and we did, but you can only cover some of the big movies, and there were so many big movies in part 1. We had to wait.
It's series. The decade itself had series.
Multiple ones, right? So it was only by the time we got to In Search of Darkness 2 we could start going deeper and deeper. Whereas now we've split it in half, so we get to go surface and deep with 90 to 94 because we've got 5 years where we can just focus. So it's kind of double the amount of insight. And then we get to cover 95 to 99. And actually within the 90s, they are very different feeling because DVD came in halfway.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I feel like there was a... Sorry, man.
No, I was just going to say, because when you say DVD came in halfway, do you mean then we got a lot more direct-to-DVD movies?
Yeah. Like everything shifted. Like it's sort of... I'm learning about it now. I'm really excited about 90s because I think that
there was technological, the jump when we was a kid, I seen Terminator 2 for the first time. I was like, what is this? Jurassic Park, what is this? Yeah, there was huge things happening. But also there was the 80s hangover, because I see some 1990, 91, 92 horror movies. There were 80s horror movies. There was that.
Oh, absolutely. And there was, there was a kind of, 89 to 90 switchover. Some movies were made in 89 and they're not released still. So there's a bit of crossover. But, I feel that the backers, how we operate as a company is quite unique. So we have a great partnership with Shudder, but it's our backers that drive everything. And
Shudder distributed, is it?
Well, no, Shudder's just one. I mean, we have distribution deals all over the world, but all the physical merchandise is exclusive to backers, so we don't let any of that out. We know who our backers are. We know how many we have, and
you work for your audience, I think, which is quite a beautiful
absolutely.
thing.
So we make, we talk to our backers. We'll be running a fan consultation before we go into crowdfunding for 90s. And we'll have a full synopsis, and our audience will feed into it, tell us what they like, what they don't like, what they want to see that isn't there. So for my job, it helps me refine the brief so I can deliver for the audience. So I don't care about Netflix. I don't even really care about Shudder because we don't know who watches Shudder, right? I care about, the 50,000 backers that we have, so it's like that's who I'm not really focused on. If we get it right for them, then everyone else will.
Because that's your base.
That's our base, That's.
But you don't have to clean it up for some executive that wants to make it. It's great. Your audience is the guy. You are in a position to bring your passion, but it's a lot of people's passions. So and they're like, we believe in you. It must be an awesome feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge responsibility, right? But that's our mission. It's narrow casting. It's almost the opposite of broadcasting. It's like, I care. We are not. I like to think we're reassuringly expensive. You're going to invest $80-90 plus in one film. We need to be giving you an experience that you can't get anywhere else. And
almost like a bespoke movie.
Yeah, well, it's not even about the movie, actually. It's about the journey of getting there, the events, the Q&As, the hangouts with the production team. The whole fact that our backer base directly influences our outcomes. We've got it down packed pretty much now. We've got one project called Aliens Expanded, which is about the movie Aliens. Where
specifically the first one or just the universe?
Second one.
The second one.
Jesus, dude, he said aliens. What the fuck?
I outed myself as a phony like 20 minutes ago. I don't know what you want from me, Vinnie.
What phony? Have you seen movies?
It's all about Aliens, the movie, and we're not really going into the wider universe because it's too big. So it's so focused. I mean, it'll be a 3-hour plus documentary.
Aliens has got a real deep cult following.
It's part of this new format that I've got called Expanded. So I'd love to do the thing Expanded.
Oh yes, please.
But we just had. I mean, we've got every month we've got different vidcasts, interactive live Q&As. On Sunday we had Mark Rolston, who plays Private Drake, come in and do a live Q&A with our backers. It was really intimate. It was amazing. Can't get that on Netflix.
Did he answer if it's Drake we're going or is it Marines we're going?
I can't remember. He was brilliant, right? But what we're trying to do is really build very intimate experiences for super fans.
Yeah.
And get better at doing that. And that means going out to our fan base way before we start selling anything. It's really understanding that product market fit and going, well, how can we tailor this exactly to this niche audience as best we can? And that's the mission now, is like, how do we get better at that?
So can I even sorry, Vinnie, I do one question to ask. Not to kind of talk down to the task that you have in front of you, but now that you've got something underneath your belt that has been so successful that the proof is in the pudding, do you feel like there's a slight way off? Like, can you enjoy the projects going forward? Because I'm sure at a time there was a stress factor.
I mean, like, this isn't. I mean, crowdfunding is a full contact sport.
Yeah, I'd imagine it is. Yeah,
you're much more under scrutiny all the way through. Like everything about In Search of Darkness has been a challenge because not only have you got to get the money, you've got to make sure you deliver the merchandise, you've got to update the back, like the whole thing, right? And so it's not for everyone. I'm all in. And ultimately the bar is raised very high, but I've got a world-class team, and that makes my job a lot easier. And I really love it. Like I really love it. It's changed my life. It's changed my team's life. This is the best job on its worst day. It's still the best job in the world, right?
And not many people can say that.
Because I don't have, I'm not accountable to anybody apart from our backers. Right.
And you're passionate about what you do.
Yeah.
So it's not like you'll never phone it in.
No.
You'll always try and bring your best.
Yeah, and there's always problems. We had a problem last week. There was an error with our Shopify ordering info, and we under-ordered slipcases. We've got these brand new trilogy slipcase, box sets for the trilogy. Nice. And we under-ordered, and we had to say to everyone that was affected, which was quite a lot of people actually, we're really sorry, we have to order more from the manufacturer, so there's going to be a delay. And that, whenever we press send on something like that, it's horrible because people are going to get, I've been waiting ages for this. I backed this project back in October 2021, and I'm like, I know we did deliver it in November, but the merchandise takes but you can't really explain that. So you
is it kind of like when your parents are disappointed but not mad? When you kind of wish they were mad because disappointed is kind of the worst.
We did a good email, quite a few emails from backers just saying, listen, thanks so much for your transparency. Take as long as you want. We love this. This has been amazing. Like it's sort of, so I feel like we're trusted. I see so many like film documentaries that I know are never going to come out. Because they don't raise enough money. And one of the biggest things, production is expensive, but I can tell you what's more expensive is merchandising. So like getting the Blu-rays, the shipping, the posters, it's the hardest part. Production's not easy, but if you know what you're doing, if you're experienced with producing, you know how to navigate it. Manufacturing fulfillment is a completely different skill set.
Postage is so expensive.
Yeah, I mean, like the shipping prices went. I mean, it's insane. If you saw how much manufacturing costs, and our stuff has to be A grade, so everything's factory pressed, like reversible inlays, slipcase, booklets, like all of it. So, but we have to deliver that level to our backers. If you went onto our Instagram or our Twitter right now, you'd just see hundreds and hundreds of people posting up pictures of their merch.
That's very cool.
And it's like the most rewarding thing for me because that's the hardest part.
Do you know earlier on when you said 90s was the kind of forgotten decade in horror? Do you think that's because there was like a stark absence of iconic villains? Because if you look at like Friday the 13th didn't get an installment in the 90s. I think Nightmare on Elm Street got one, I think. And then, it
wasn't great. Yeah, it was that
that kind of very meta. But it wasn't until like the late 90s that we got a real iconic
Ghostface.
Yeah, Ghostface from Scream. And I kind of always equated what Scream did for the slasher subgenre in the 90s to what Halloween did to the slasher subgenre in the late 70s, early 80s. And do you think there in the 90s, aside from Chucky, there's no real iconic villains that run throughout or prevalent?
It's weird, right? Because you do have Ghostface. I mean, there are a whole bunch of iconic movies, and it's very like I think that I wasn't sure.
Candyman,
honestly. I suppose. Yeah, Candyman. Right? I wasn't sure. There. I mean, like I'd have to turn in my horror card if I said there wasn't. But like this is the way I look at it. And I look at it at a kind of commercial level, right? When we knew we were going to finish the 80s and we knew that we wanted to do 90s, but we weren't sure about the demand. Every time we mentioned 90s we got about 150,000 followers on our social media for the horror documentary across Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Every time we mention 90s, it just blows up.
Really?
Yeah, and it's because we're far away enough from that decade now the same way that we can kick off a conversation tonight and talk about the aesthetic of 80s horror, and we all know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
There has been enough time from the 90s now where you know what a 90s feel is.
Yeah.
But what's great is there's so much to explore. There's probably oodles more movies that you don't know about.
Yeah. Oh, I learned that the hard way. 100%.
Yeah, 100%. And I think but the 90s, I kind of say it's like it's becoming the 80s, because when we grew up in the 90s, we were kids looking back on the generation. We didn't experience really like in the same
in it, but didn't experience it.
Exactly, no. So we kind of retroactively kind of experienced the 80s in a lot of ways as 90 kids, but that's what we grew up with. So that's where the nostalgia was. But now that we've grown up, we're looking back in our own childhoods and when we were teenagers and whatnot. And if you look at the 90s, I think now the 90s is starting to get that same nostalgia that we felt for the 80s in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it's a 30 years kind of time warp. Like it's you're bang on. And I think the timing, I think 80s isn't getting played out because it will be there forever, but it's certainly, we had a peak.
Yeah.
Stranger Things was a big thing. Yeah.
2019, 2020 was like peak. And now it's like it's peak 90s. So I feel like we're hitting that at the right time. And the proof will be in the pudding. But
you said something that really kind of resonated with me, because I don't know, because we're closer to it. I don't know what I could tell you is like a 2023 film that would not be a 2013 film. Oh, no. That's like very early 10s. No. This is a 2023. I don't really know. Maybe it's because we're too close, or literally too close to it and also directly in it. But you're right. You're just far enough away from the 90s that it's segmented and we've moved away from it.
We can
look back on it as a whole.
We can be nostalgic, and our relationship with that decade is very different to the relationship with the 80s. And I think that one of the things we've picked up from our backers is there's enough iconic material that people gravitate towards it. But there's so, like, my tagline for it is the lost decade, right? The lost decade of horror. And I'm pitching 90s In Search of Darkness almost as let's go on this journey together.
Yeah.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, because there is, like, as you said, it's the lost decade. So like I'm looking at it like in a way of like in comparison with the 80s, and maybe that's a bit unfair to the 90s, but like there was like some bleed over, sequels from 1980 franchises going into the 90s and stuff like that, and they were oftentimes inferior, and that's the only reason I was kind of comparing the two. But like if you look at the 90s, like aside from the late 90s, do you think the early 90s like was kind of lacking though, like a Freddy Krueger, or like I think Chucky was
early 90s. I think I would agree with Vinnie.
Yeah, I think but you got to look at what's happening in the industry. So we've had this massive hockey stick through the 80s, and suddenly it falls off a cliff.
Yeah.
So Hollywood won't touch horror.
Yeah.
Right? And now
is it the action hero? Is there that?
I suppose Hannibal Lecter was 91, wasn't
it? Yeah.
So I'll give you that. That's iconic as it gets.
Yeah, that's a horror movie. And so, we covered Manhunter in Search of Darkness, right? And
Kiss. I love that.
It's a great, it's special. I actually went to a screening a few weeks ago of The Keep.
Oh my God.
Right. Which is flawed, but has a soul to it. It has this sort of,
it's the good kind of cheese.
Yeah, it's the
good kind of bad.
The good kind of bad, right? But you can see there's enough Michael Mann. I've digressed onto this, but like there's enough Michael Mann in it for it to be like very intriguing. But Manhunter's amazing. But then you go, I watched recently Silence of the Lambs again, and I was like, bloody hell, this is an amazing film. In a very different way.
Jodie Foster's world class though.
Yeah. But
world class
in a very different way to how amazing Manhunter is. Like Manhunter is one of my favorite movies, and every time I watch it, I see new things in it. But it's not Hollywood A++ the same way. They're very different. You can't really compare them because they're so different. But I can't wait to dive into that. I think that I went into In Search of Darkness with a whole bunch of knowledge and some preconceived ideas of how I want it to be and what I wanted to cover. And I think what's exciting about 90s is I'm still going in with some preconceived ideas, but far less.
Yeah,
right. And I want to go to our audience and say, present them with a synopsis of what we're doing, and for them to be like, this is amazing, but have you thought about this, that, and that, and that? And we're like, oh, we'll put this in.
Yeah.
So it's like
exciting.
It's a giant jigsaw puzzle. You build the edges and let them build up the middle for you, pretty much.
I'm going to borrow that, right? Because that's
too.
exactly what this is. And what will happen is your relationship to not only 90s horror, but In Search of Darkness 90s will be unique because you would have contributed to it.
Man, I think that is a perfect note to leave it on. That is like, do you want to let everybody know where they can hit you up, where they can contribute? Because, like, In Search of Darkness, it is the journey. If you're a horror fan,
It's the most comprehensive thing I've ever seen. Yeah. It is by far. In fact, it's so much so that I've never said that. I'll never say this about anything in my life. I don't think it ever needs to be done again. If that wasn't neat, if that wasn't
I agree.
your fucking guide, then what do you want? It's over. It's like 15 3/4 hours. I watched one a day, by the way, and the third day I was like, okay, no, I'll sit down and watch now. 5 hours and 15 minutes. I was
okay. I've got a story
and
about this, right? I never anticipated it would be so long, and it's David Weiner, right? So David Weiner is a phenomenal talent, and put so much into it. And I was getting really worried about runtimes, because if on a traditional Blu-ray, like what we call a BD25, after about 4.5 hours, the quality deteriorates. And I remember having this chat with him about In Search of Darkness 2, going, God, the runtime is getting insane on this. And but by the time we got to part 3, I just said, David, do whatever you want. Right. See you in a few months. Just present your. So I remember the first time I watched it, and I've been seeing sequences come through and that kind of stuff, and I checked in. But I'm not the kind of EP that will be over your shoulder. If you deliver for me, then I'll trust you. And we always start with a very clear roadmap of what we're doing.
He delivered in 1 and 2 as well.
Yeah, so we kind of knew what we were doing. But I remember watching the first edit. So this was before it was really finalized and all the motion graphics were in. It wasn't a rough cut, but it wasn't finessed.
Yeah.
And I remember after about 20 minutes of watching it, my critical part of my brain just switched off, and I was just like, I'm just really enjoying the experience. And I remember I came back.
I was eating a bag of crisps going, it's way too cheap.
Yeah. I went back to David at the end. I actually don't have any constructive criticism because I couldn't. I was enjoying it too much.
Nostalgic.
And what's brilliant is part 3's been nominated for a Rondo Hatton Award for Best Documentary for all 3. And we've been nominated for a Fangoria Golden Chainsaw Award. Like, I think that it will be one of those things that it will grow its own fan base over the next few years. And we'll do a re-release in a few years' time. And, people will get another opportunity to own it. Because we only do limited runs of the merchandise, and I feel like it will, every horror fan who's like identifies with horror will eventually want to have that in their collection.
Yeah.
And if I move into another area, I'll always have that, and it's like one of the best things I've ever been involved with. So I'm very grateful.
You made an actual encyclopedia, man. That's what you did.
That's what it is. It is like that.
An actual encyclopedia. It's incredible.
It's like a virtual almanac of horror, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
I just love listening to you because I'm like, yeah, it is. This wasn't. I can't take credit for it. Like I started working on it.
You happen to be fair. It took a village. You've made that much very clear.
100%. Like I wrote. This is the power of manifesting your ideas. I remember it was July 2018. I had my Moleskine book that I still have. Right. Obviously not that copy. And I wrote out the title. I wrote who I wanted to be into it and the format. And then it just started, and the building blocks came, and we got lucky with contributors. I had a chat with Barbara Crampton on the weekend about a movie she's doing, and she called me up.
She's awesome.
She's awesome. And I said to
we
her,
love you, Barbara. Like,
yeah, well, I said to Barbara, you joining the cast of In Search of Darkness was a massive turning point for our project. I remember being on the phone to her for the first time, and Barbara was like, I'm not very comfortable doing crowdfunded projects because there's been other ones and they haven't come out. And I'm like, no, we're not like that. We're like completely, legit and know what we're doing and all of that kind of. She gave us a shot, and having her on board gave us another layer of credibility. I reminded her of that story, and also, the whole village thing isn't because we have an intimate relationship with our audience, with our backers. It's all of us. If your name is in the credits in Search of Darkness, no one will ever take that's the link. That is the bridge between your fandom and everybody that made that era special, and you're forever intertwined with them. I call it fandom with purpose, and that's what we're all about. It's like building those bridges between what you love. It's our job to go out and get everybody and do a great job, but we can't do it without our backers. We don't raise, commercial money. We have to do it through crowdfunding. And so if you're part of this, no one will ever be able to take it away. If you look on eBay and type it in Search Darkness, the Blu-rays go for hundreds of dollars. Even like the pins go for like just like it's crazy because no one sells them because they're like, well, my name's in it. Like I'm going to hang on to it. So.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It's literally a badge of honor.
Benny, all right, Ben, you got in your terrible joke.
It was a great joke. It was organic. It was organic.
It was organic. I'll give you an organic. Yeah.
All right, Robin, do you want to tell the folks what you like your where they can back or what you got planned in the future?
So like when is this going out?
Next week.
Oh, okay, perfect. So the 28th of March, 2023, if you go to 80shorrordoc.com, you'll be able to pick up a trilogy box set only while stocks last. We've only got limited stocks now. And the flash sale ends on April 11th. And then there just won't be any more copies for a very, very long time. So,
and I did one of them.
Yeah. And we're moving into 90s horror. That'll be our next horror project. And we're working on a sequel to In Search of Tomorrow.
Awesome. Your science fiction documentary.
Yeah. So it's busy. And I've got a gaming documentary coming out this year as well, which is all about first-person shooters, which is in post-production now. That comes out in June, July.
Where do you find the time, dude?
Do you know what? Right, like I'm not brilliant in anything, but I'm quite good at putting a team together, and I tend to work with people who are just awesome.
Find people that are good at the things you're not good at, pretty much.
Well, not just that. I think that is finding people that want to do the thing you need them to do, right? And it's going back to the thing I mentioned at the start, and the reason why you're doing this podcast. You're doing this podcast because there's something in you that has to express how you feel about it. And that is intrinsic motivation, and it's the most powerful force for human beings. And so my job is to come up with concepts and ideas where you can attract people that if they turn up, if they commit, they get to do the best work of their lives, and it will change their lives. David Weiner, you can Google David Weiner. He will be forever linked to In Search of Darkness. It's his crowning achievement. And this is a guy that's been, has a very illustrious career before this. And, there isn't a secret, but if there was, it would be that, and I'm very strict with the types of people I work with. And we all really commit. But it all comes from that same desire, which has led you to do this tonight. It's the same thing.
Man, on a much bigger scale, but I do appreciate the note. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time, man. I don't know where you find it. I didn't know you had any. I assume you don't sleep. It's sort of the other things I always talk about with my team. It's like climbing a mountain, right? So it's just, you can't think about the summit. You just got to do. It's a power. It's compound interest. It's like, every day you're chipping away. Whenever we're just about to finish fulfillment for In Search of Darkness 3, and like it's always kind of weird and emotional when we use a software program called Trello, which does all our project management. When we close down a Trello board because we've delivered and completed a project, it's like your child has moved out. It's like it's
go through withdrawals.
Yeah, and you go, but we did it. And at the start, you were like, God, this is an impossible mission. You know, it's just working, and there isn't any other secret. And I don't, you know, I have good days and bad days like everybody. But we just keep it moving, and eventually you get there, and that's it. And the thing I'd say before we sort of sign out, I suppose, is, you know, we've reached this. We've delivered 5 documentaries in 4.5 years, right? I don't want that to be the peak. I want to go much higher.
Yeah,
and then that means
started.
yeah, and that means like working on the experience. What, you know, what does it mean to be a backer to one of our projects? How can we deliver more value? How can we bring people together? You know, like that's.
Although your analogy is trash because there's nowhere to go after the peak.
Yeah,
I want to, you know, I want to
create a new
Time of the peak.
Yeah.
What are you doing here, man? Like, you know.
but then you need to challenge yourself, because and like I said, 90s horror is going to have tons of creative challenges, because define the aesthetic for 90s horror. It's not as simple.
No,
Like we all can feel it a little bit now. But
yeah, I can. I don't know how to put it into words or describe it, but I do. I do appreciate that. Yeah.
Every like when you look back at every generation, every decade, you can almost tell which decade it is from its production style.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like I can nearly always tell you, like, you look at 70s, you can tell 70s, 80s, 90s, you can always tell from the production style. Also, and then the kind of everything getting got a bit sheeny after like 2010, everything got HD and 4K, you know. But like, so Robin, like before we let you go here, I really want to thank you for coming along. You've been a fountain of information here. It's been so cool. Thank you so much for making your documentaries. I've caught every one of them.
Thank you for making your documentaries.
In such a
Thank you
darkness.
for having me on. You know, like I'm very. It's incredible. You know, I always. Like, it's very humbling when people want to speak to you, and you know, I think all we can do is work on things which are interesting to us, right? And if other people find it interesting, that's a complete win.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
man,
if you can ride the wave of that. It's a very special thing, and I think you did a masterclass on it.
That's really kind. Thank you.
Before we let you go, thank you for all the things you've done, and thanks for all the things that you're going to do, right? So, really appreciate it, man. And so I'm your host, Vincent Green.
I'm your host, Noel Tui.
This Invasion of Potty Snatchers, and that's Robin Block. Thank you again, and I was going to say motherfucker, sorry, man. Thanks again, man. See you next.
And I love you didn't, and then you did. So smooth.
It's smooth. See you next time, man. Take care.
Want some candy?